curious analytical. This animated visualization shows how human biology repairs a wound. Cells multiply, bridging the gap to seal off the body from the outside world. If that process fails, an open wound only has two remaining natural pathways. It becomes infected or it triggers systemic tissue decay. But one man carried open, actively bleeding injuries on his hands, feet, and side for exactly 50 years. They never healed, they never became infected, and they never formed scar tissue. Highly credentialed secular physicians traveled to examine these injuries. They brought formal medical instruments, conducted controlled examinations, and analyzed the tissue using the clinical terminology of their era. As you can see in these official reports preserved in Vatican archives, the conclusions were remarkably consistent. The normal biological rules of tissue repair had ceased to apply, leaving the examiners with no natural medical explanation. The visible injuries first appeared in September the year 1918. Rather than simply endorsing the reports, church authorities demanded a medical audit. They dispatched Professor Luigi Romanelli, the director of a secular hospital in Barletta, into this remote monastery to investigate. Romanelli had a strict professional reputation to protect. Over the next year, he subjected Padre Pio to 5 separate formal medical examinations, documenting the physical state of the tissue each time. Take a look at this clinical cross-section of an open fissure. Under normal biological conditions, active bleeding invites bacterial colonization, which triggers an inflammatory response. Romanelli documented none of this. There was zero swelling and no trace of bacteria. Even more strangely, over an entire year of observation, the tissue remained entirely static. There was zero progression toward healing and no necrosis. Romanelli submitted his findings to the church, stating plainly that standard pathological categories failed. As a physician, he wrote that he could not organically account for the active state of the wounds. A year later, a second prominent physician, Dr. Giorgio Festa, arrived. Festa was a man of science, fully prepared to uncover a physical mechanism like self-infliction, fraud, or an underlying pathology. Instead, he documented a highly specific structural reality. Festa confirmed that these were not superficial surface abrasions. The wounds penetrated completely through the hands. He also recorded a physical detail that challenged clinical norms. Open tissue produces a specific biological odor of decay. Festa observed that these injuries emitted a consistent floral fragrance resembling roses or violets rather than the smell of rotting flesh. Festa eventually published his findings in a formal medical book 14 years later. Prolonged independent scientific scrutiny over more than a decade consistently failed to resolve the physical impossibilities he witnessed. Despite these medical reports, the institutional reaction from Rome was severe. Between the year 1922 and 1933, church authorities heavily restricted Padre Pio's public ministry, acting out of extreme caution regarding the rapidly growing unverified devotion surrounding him. He was forbidden from showing the injuries publicly or celebrating Mass with large congregations. In response, Padre Pio accepted every restriction and retreated into isolation without a single word of protest because he accepted a decade of silence rather than seeking out an audience. The medical documentation gathered behind these institutional barriers stands entirely on its own merits, unclouded by self-promotion. Padre Pio passed away inside the sanctuary on the morning of September 23rd in the year 1968. That date marked exactly 50 years of continuous medically documented presentation of his injuries. In the hours immediately following his death, attending physicians made one final clinical observation. The wounds, which had been present and bleeding for half a century, completely disappeared. Multiple doctors signed formal post-mortem statements confirming the physical state of his body. The skin on his hands, feet, and side was perfectly smooth. There was no residual tissue damage and absolutely zero structural scarring. 50 years of medical documentation leaves behind a biological reality that began inexplicably, persisted in defiance of human biology, and vanished without a trace. The findings documented in the formal record lead to the same 4 words: no scientific explanation found. Before you go, if the story of Padre Pio stirred something in you, his faith, his suffering, his miracles, then this journey is just beginning. On Life's Gold Anchor, we uncover powerful, documented stories that challenge what you think you know about faith, the supernatural, and the lives of extraordinary souls. More revelations, more untold stories, more moments that will stay with you long after the video ends. Subscribe now and become part of a growing community seeking truth, faith, and deeper understanding. Turn on notifications so you never miss the next episode of Padre Pio, Servant of Miracles. Because some stories aren't just watched, they are experienced.